So Akin asked the question last week regarding what is left, what we'll be doing left. So first, I think I always come back to this, that Azure DevOps is a suite of services, and we're trying to take them one after the other. We started with organizations, which is not even part of the suite of services, but we touched on Azure boards, I think last week, which is a management tool kind of here. It helps to plan and track and all of those, and then we'll be going to Azure Repos now, even though this is not arranged chronologically, but we'll be going to Azure Repos now. This is a cloud-hosted public Git repository, and then we would go to pipelines and then test plans. Test plans and artifacts compress that into just one class. And like I said, Azure Pipelines is like the heart of Azure DevOps. The extension is the heart of DevOps as a whole. It's where all of those DevOps terms would come together in all those continuous integration, continuous delivery, release pipelines, environments, those stats. Those terminologies that you'll be hearing here and there. When we get to Azure Pipelines, that's when all of those would actually make sense, when you see them in action. But for today, we will be focusing. I hope I'm loud enough and clear enough.
Yeah, it's good.
Okay. So we'll be touching on Azure Repos that is basically used to host our code. So I'm sharing this whiteboard because I just wanted to still explain. This is like the full process for DevOps, in Azure DevOps. So what we'll be talking about today is basically from here to here. How the code, the source code, your configuration file, your scripts, database scripts that is being written by the developers, the database administrators, and then the ops team, how from their local machine. I think I mentioned that this is representing like a local machine. So there's this mechanism that is called version control, or version control system, or control system, control version control is basically a system or a software now, if we would have it that way. It helps us to control or manage. I think I'm using control too many. So it helps to manage the different versions of something. Well, in our case, it's going to be source code now. Well, not just source code. Developers are the ones that write source code for a particular application, and then DBAs write queries, and then ops teams write templates to provision infrastructure and all of those. So basically, version control system is a software that resides either locally and remotely, because for most of the parts, you would not have just one developer working on a project or one DB. You have a bunch of them, a number of them working, and you want to have them work together, and then they are working on various parts of the system or the application now, but they all still need to whatever it is that they are building still needs to, in a way, be merged together, and then to eventually meet or solve the problem. Whatever system that is being built now is the end goal is to solve a problem, to meet a need from a certain demography or a certain number of people, even just one person. Yeah, so there are instances where the solution is being used just to aid person. There are plenty of use cases for that. So the tool that actually enables that collaboration is the version control system. Is again to manage different versions, because over time an application is not just built in one day. You don't just think of have that idea and then immediately, maybe the next day, you just conjure it and then everything starts working. There's a plan, or there are phases that application development actually goes through, planning, designing, before you even start writing code and all of those. So the version control system that we will be talking about, there are a number of version control systems out there. A number of them right now. Since the inception, I think 2023 was when the distributed one actually came into limelight. Even before that, there have been different version control system, and this highlights the importance of this tool. It actually aids collaboration so much. There are a bunch of popular ones. Version control system now as a whole, I think we have Git, we have Subversion and Courier, but the one that is actually, let's say, being used everywhere is Git. Subversion, I know a few people. In fact, I work with an Indian company that uses SVM. Subversion is outdated. It's not being used. It's used mostly for legacy system. Git is like the industry standard now, and that's just those are just they're just different types of version control system. But there are two main types, of version control models now. We have the centralized model and also the distributed model. The centralized model is like the archaic one. Should I say archaic? It's still being used, but it's not advised or recommended that new projects use that kind of centralized model, because it means all of the users, they have to connect to central. There's just one central database, and then they have to connect to it and then stay connected to it to be able to manage or work on different files in that repository now. And then it's the server that houses all of the changes. We're going to have a demo for not centralized one, or for the distributed. Like I said, we also have the distributed version, which is what we'll be focusing on. I don't want to really dwell on the centralized one, even though Azure DevOps has a centralized kind of, it has a centralized version control system for they just put into consideration those legacy systems that probably some old organizations still use. It's called Team Foundation Version Control. Again, I myself have not actually, not one-on-one used it, even though I work with a developer that uses it, but I still have to, in a way, convert it to Git, which is industry standard, and it's way, way easier to manage. So the setup, all of the code basically for the centralized is like I said, is running on the central server. You must check out and then check in the code each. And once a developer is working on that code, is plugged into that central server, whatever file that developer is working with, no one else can actually work on that particular file again. There's so many. It has its advantages also, and then I think the cons are more. Disadvantages are more. Now, it was a system that was built on us, but the distributed one, which is what we'll be focusing on, is it solves most of the issue that centralized one had or has, because each user has the entire repository. We call it fork or clone the entire repository. All of the repository sitting in this source code version control management, now is pulled into the developer's machine. If you have, let me see, let me depict this. So you have your central repository here, and then you have different developers working on it. This is developer A, developer B, C, D, C5. So I think I mentioned that you don't want to have more than 5 people in the team. So this is our central repository now, distributed repository. And for each developer now, they have their computer. They are working on their local machine. This is the laptop here. This also is a machine. This is working from maybe Germany now. This is in Europe, somewhere in Asia. There. Developer also looking from Nigeria. Developing machine here. We are working on the same project. We're trying to build probably an ERP system, fintech ERP system. But all of the codes are being managed, on this remote repository. What they call it, remote. So using my mouse to write this is staying remote repository. I'm talking about the distributed version control system here. But each of the developers now, they also have their local repository. They have a local repository that contains all of the code that is, in this remote repository. They have it locally, so they can work and edit, swap, that code as they like. Even decide to, if anything breaks, is on their local machine. And then you don't want to push something that is broken to the remote machine. So I'm just using that one. So the beauty of the distributed one is that everyone has the source control running locally in their machine. They can develop locally. It has this advantage and disadvantages also. I think one of the major advantages is that when you use the distributed model, whatever breaks, well, what I think is things will break while you're coding, it doesn't affect what is, on the remote repository. That's where all of the files that has been worked on over the course of the development stage. So before you push, you want to make sure that that code is working as it should. The tests mechanisms that are in place. Even before you can push, there's some things, some checks that would also be carried out. But also, like I said, there's nothing that does not have disadvantage, especially when it comes to technology. The disadvantage I can think of is, at some point, like I said, you would have to merge your code from local to the remote repository, and then if, for adventure, the developer in India and the one in somewhere in Africa now, they worked on the same file now, and there's this thing called conflict, merge conflict. When two developers work on the same file, there's maybe they edited this one line of code. Resolving that kind of conflict now can be disadvantageous, because you're trying to merge two things that are opposed to each other into one. So that is like I wouldn't. It's a disadvantage in a way, but it's a way also of checking that you don't send the wrong thing to the central repository. So the main points of a version control system is to help maintain a detailed history of the project. Like I said, applications are built over time, even when you have the design and all of those. Coding is not a one-day thing. I've seen just one file in a code repository that has 10,000 lines of code, and that's tell you it's not written in one day. So to maintain the history, like, okay, yes, I'm working on a module today. I've been able to write maybe 10 functions or 10 APIs now, to use the right terms. And then after working on that 10 endpoint APIs, push it to the remote repository. I have a version of that there. The next day, I'm working on another 5 or 6 APIs. I also push that, and I have a record of that, records, and that's just for this particular developer. All that this developer also is pushing is you have the different records being, stored in a way, and then, the history of all of those changes that is being made to that remote repository. Even the ones that you have locally, you have like your local history for this particular user, but on the remote one, it has the history for every person that is working on that repository. And so that's how powerful the version control is. It saves history of all of the work that is being done in a particular project, and also the ability to work on different versions of it. At times, okay, maybe somebody pushed something that broke, something on the application now on the project. You can revert. You can say, okay, yes, it was this particular merge that caused that issue. You can revert back to the previous version, then, so that the application is up and running before you now look at, okay, yes, this issue that broke the application, where did that bug come in, or what introduced that bug, and then when that is fixed, we can now revert back to it. And so it gives the ability to manage different versions of an application, and having a detailed history of the project is very, very important, because you can see the progress of your project over time. Like, okay, yes, 2 months ago we were able to work on this particular feature, and then when we deploy this feature, the end users now, they add a better usage of the application. But this new feature that we are trying to introduce, which is like a counterpart of that one, let's see if after we introduce it, if we'll still get the same traction from our users. Without this, there's no way to actually keep proper record of how the application or the project is actually doing. And then it's not just like it doesn't mean you can only jump back to maybe previous. You can jump to any part, any history that's it's being recorded any time, in any point in time in the course of the project. The cover files, and then also an advantage is, even if this remote repository for some reason goes down, because all of the developers have copy of the projects and files in the project now on their local machine, it's easy to actually retrieve, and then your project is in a way is saved, so you can always recover from any of the local repositories. Like I said again, we'll be focused on Git, which is a distributed version control system, and I want to also mention, I know I mentioned earlier that I wanted to put the documentation that I was working on a Google Doc document. So I just want to point out that is like a layman's, or is a way Google Docs, as the software as a service now, is like a mini version control system. Let me share my screen and show you how Google Docs is a version control system. Or is there anybody that actually has